Hello and welcome. My name is Andoristic. Creating Subnautica builds in Minecraft is something I've had an affinity for a little while now. The world of Subnautica truly is something special, and ever since finding myself in its waters I've been enraptured by every aspect of it, and getting myself lost in every corner of it that the devs so caringly handcrafted. There's just too much cool shit to not take inspiration from when sourcing creativity and channeling it into your artistic medium of choice. In my case, building in Minecraft. I've built creatures and vehicles, leviathans, and the odd landscape, but I wanted to do so much more. Infinite amounts of wonder lay under 4546B's waves, amounts that honestly posed a real challenge, and would be very difficult to replicate in the ways that I wanted to in Minecraft at the scale I wanted to. Subnautica's seascapes have an endless sense of discovery to them, deriving from the sheer expansiveness of it all. It's a hard thing to be able to convey when having to build inside of the confined amount of vertical space available in vanilla Minecraft. A problem that could of course be solved with Java Edition mods, but was impossible for me at the time because I didn't own a PC. All of the limitations that came with Bedrock Edition were bearing down on me. A lack of world edits and other building tools, on top of the height limitations insurmountable to me, is really where all of my ideas fell off. I found these builds incredibly fun to work on, but I backed myself into a corner by way of my own ambition, conditioned from the fully realized environments that I wanted to make, but wasn't able to. That is, until the moment where I put the only computer I had access to, and a copy of Minecraft Java Edition, to good use. And sometime before I asked myself, am I certain whatever I'm doing is worth it, is when I found myself recreating the entirety of Subnautica's world map, full scale, inside of Minecraft. It would be 2,000 blocks deep, 4,000 wide squared, and feature the gigantic wreckage of the Aurora in its totality. Possible because in Minecraft versions following 1.18, the Caves and Cliffs update, you're able to change the minimum and maximum height values by simply altering their respective numbers inside of the code, using only a data pack. No mods needed. As of now, I've finished the Aurora, which is what the majority of the work has been towards, as well as importing all of Subnautica's world terrain data into blocks using external programs. This is where 3.5 years of building and nearly 5 years of planning has gotten me. Now, with all of this in place, I have complete freedom to work on any part of Subnautica's world I'd like to. And I know that this series, filling this world with everything from Subnautica, is going to be an absolute blast. I'll go over the process of importing all of Subnautica's terrain data into Minecraft in part 2 of this series. And while that whole part of the build is seriously cool, this video is about building the Aurora, which is what I should get on with showing you. Maintaining accuracy all throughout this build solely depends on the fact that Subnautica's coordinate grid lines up with Minecraft's perfectly, and that 1 meter of distance on the coordinate grid in Subnautica equals 1 block or 1 meter of distance on the coordinate grid in Minecraft. With this in mind, we can make the positions of things across the game and the build line up perfectly by copying the coordinate numbers from one game to the other. The best way I found to effectively build and accurately build is by lining up my FreeCam camera in Subnautica with the position of an object I want to make, and I'll use the command set block to place a marker block at the coordinates that I want to carry over to Minecraft. Usually a diamond block so that I can distinguish these points from the rest of the build while I'm working on it. With this, we can accurately map out anything in the world. And to start the project off, why not with the largest object in its world? Being the crashed capital starship, vessel Aurora. I started by mapping the shape of one of the Aurora's gigantic cylindrical engines, which when finished, I'd be able to copy over 4 times to create the ship's iconic quad engine design. In process, creating a clear frame that the rest of the ship would come to spatially occupy. The footage you're seeing now was actually recorded about halfway through the project. I had gone back and remade the main quad engines from scratch, as I wasn't initially happy with how they had shaped up. Since I jumped straight into the project as soon as I had gotten Java Minecraft, I wasn't versed in using World Edit yet. So all of the connection lines between points I had originally made by hand instead of connecting them with commands. And this early on in the build, I wasn't using a different block for my marker points. So, as I built, the accuracy of the shape was lost, since I had almost 0 point of reference on where to keep my shaping bound to. I had also overlooked putting the stripe on my first engine iteration. meaning that I'd have to do that for all 4 individually. I ultimately made the decision to remake them from scratch. They did turn out considerably better, and they make for a lot more satisfying of a time lapse this time around too. After finishing the main engines, I moved to the stern of the ship, where the smaller engines would be housed. The lack of utilization of either World Edit or Axiom is quite apparent in these earlier clips. Even though it was a lot of extra work at the time, it was great practice for me at building on angles. As you might have noticed, the whole build is at a 45-degree angle laterally, as the Aurora runs from southwest to northeast instead of being straight on with any of the 4 cardinal directions. It also leans a bit forward, as well as to its left side. I'm just glad that it is on a perfect 45-degree angle, and not a random, arbitrary, harder to work with value. For now, I'm representing the triangular green lights that adorn the back of the ship with a solid color, but I'll go back and add some frog lights to these to make them feel like actual lights a bit later. I feel everything about this part of the build is just so iconic to the Aurora. I really do enjoy just gazing at the final build, and all just comes together to recreate the ship's such recognizable design. The build being on all of these angles makes it impossible to copy and paste the majority of its sections across to the opposite side. Instead, I opt to model each section uniquely. All of the engines are symmetrical shapes though, so those are one of the things that I can copy multiple times over and save time with. One could argue I should have built the whole build facing straight on all axes, and rotated after it's finished. And while maybe it's more difficult doing it the way that I have, I wouldn't have been able to maintain the level of accuracy I achieve here by using the exact coordinates and positions that the Aurora is at in-game. And doing it that way, I would have had to take and base the build on measurements, and it would have become inaccurately sized in one aspect or another fairly quickly. Plus there's the problem of having to fix all of the holes and smoothing out all of the rough surfaces that are a result of the interpolation calculations that tools like World Edit and Axiom have to determine when rotating builds, ending up with a far from perfect result. These stone sections that connect the engines to the middle section are so uniquely shaped, and were one of my favorite parts of building the ship. They're just so fluidly shaped, and all 4 of them being angled differently makes them so fun to digest when looking at. Me building all of the smaller engines and finishing the detailing on this large flat surface that makes up a large portion of the stern marks the completion of this part of the build. I then moved to the top of the Aurora and began to model the ship's bridge. Keep in mind these open areas will eventually get closed and then connect the bridge to the stern. I just found it easier to build the bridge sectioned off by itself first. This first replay clip of building the bridge is actually 25 hours long. Not consecutively recorded, but over the stretch of about a week, where I of course stopped to pause. Time where I'm tabbed out of the game isn't counted in replay file lengths either, as the game is technically paused. It's because of this that figuring an accurate amount of hours that this project took is difficult. I'll go over the number of hours the time-lapse is, and the amount of Subnautica Steam hours I've amassed over the course of this project at the very end of the video, and come up with an estimate on the number of hours that the Aurora took to make. Anyway, the singular 25-hour replay file is something that my old computer seriously struggled to load, just because of the sheer length of it and the amount of blocks that get placed. The very next replay I recorded ended up being 28 hours long, but I split it into 2 when rendering it because I was very scared of it crashing my game and me losing it. Might I remind you that the world's height in this world is 2,000 blocks, and all of this was very demanding on my first, commandeered, hand-me-down, non-gaming PC. Building the bridge portion is where I had to decide which version of the Aurora I would be building, the exploded or pre-explosion version. The bridge changes to being broken when the explosion happens. And a fun fact is that the whole ship moves forward by 2 meters when the 2 different Aurora models exchange during the explosion. That was fun to find out, and definitely didn't cause problems for me at all. But yeah, I wound up choosing to build the exploded version because this is the version of the Aurora present for most of playtime in a playthrough. And it's the version that includes the interior. This opening and the noisy texture that I end up with at this point is something I'll return to and make look better later. I create a tileable, repeatable texture for the ship's open and exposed damage sections later on in the build that I'll apply to this section as well. And here I connect the bridge up to the stern by finishing this middle section that I left open previously. It was seriously coming together, but there was a lot left to do still. I then moved to the very bottom of the ship. I figured making these more complicated sections first before building the main hull would be the easiest way to go about it. I found that eating an elephant and building the Aurora are not too dissimilar from each other, if you can believe it. This is the point of the build where I rebuilt the engines, and between two of these clips is where they get swapped out for the striped new design that you saw me build. The prominence of blue that makes up most of the lower section of the ship was a nice break from the amount of whites and grays that were overly present on my computer screen up until this point, and was a nice, fresh breath of oxygen. This bottom section extends all the way along the hull to the very front of the ship, and with it in place, the essential foundation that the rest of the build will take form up from is set. I then start to build this giant circular element present on the sides of the ship. These would be on both sides, but the exploded Aurora only features the right side since the other side is opened up to the exposed interior structure. I then begin filling in this giant rounded hull section that makes up this lower half of the ship, adorned by these black oval-shaped patterns and color splashes of bright blue lights. Using diamond blocks and sea lanterns to create these glowing blue lights is one of my favorite visual elements of this build, and is a block combination I find very pretty. I use these blocks together for my new Ghost Leviathan design, as well as my roof back, and are blocks I'm excited to use more when building certain locations later when I move on from the Aurora and onto Subnautica's biomes. With both sides of the lower hull done, and all of the gaps in the bottom of the ship filled in, I start to work on the top of the hull. These top sections are quite torn up, and giant holes that peer into the ship's internal structure are a prominent feature. I leave these openings unfinished for now, but I will soon come back to fill and fully detail all of these damaged sections. Top sections done, I can connect them to the bridge, and the position of the bridge in relation to the rest of the build makes a bit more sense now that it is actually connected to the hull. The last part of the hull is filling in these side portions, thus completing the outside shell of the whole ship. Missing, of course, all of the exposed internal structure and exploded portions. I rendered this replay with the Distant Horizons mod so that you can get a picture of just what the build is looking like so far. As you can see, there's many open portions that still need to be filled. It's this part of the build where I begin to use the mod Axiom. I can use its shape modeling tool to fill in my surfaces rather than placing all of the blocks by hand, which speeds things up drastically. I know, it's about time. Even still, the building process was tedious, and it wouldn't be for another year until the Aurora would be completed. I start working on the giant metal beams that compose the skeleton of the ship. I apologize for the chunks flashing in and out so rapidly in these clips. This was before I got my new computer and my render distance was at 20 chunks instead of max. By the time I return to this front part of the ship, I'll have a higher render distance, and this problem will be avoided. The metal beams at the front of the ship wrap the entire circumference of the hull. When standing below looking up at them, it just further emphasizes the ship's true scale. I had to texture these beams by hand still, a time-consuming process, but I took the extra effort to ensure the textures line up with what's seen in-game. Then I moved my focus towards filling in the holes in the side of the hull, using a temporary block that I'll eventually paint over top of. I also paint the shape of the damaged sections onto the engines, which I indent by a block, giving the opening some depth. I then repeat this whole process for the opposite side. It goes by in a split second here, but I spent a long time getting the shape of the surface behind the metal beams right, using Axiom to model with, and I smoothed the shape over by hand to make sure it looks right. Now I begin another one of my favorite parts of the build, and I start to texture, using Subnautica as my reference the whole time, of course. I'm able to copy the texture I created on the bottom engine up to the top, because of the fact that they share the same shape. Then after filling in the missing parts, I start texturing the openings in the hull. After texturing this much by hand, I worked on finding a way to turn what I had done into a repeatable pattern that I could paint onto the remaining unfinished surfaces. I was able to flatten out and fill in the gaps in my texture into a fully repeatable and consistent pattern. And it was well worth the effort because in my opinion it turned out great. The regular paintbrush tool doesn't really work correctly on an angled surface like this, but I eventually found out how to apply my pattern to the masked gold blocks properly. And the crazy thing is that the position of every part of this textured section is nearly identical to what is seen when looking at the same section in Subnautica. For texturing my engines on the opposite side of the ship, I was able to flatten the texture I'd made for the opposite side and reuse it for this side, only having to make minor fixes. The next thing to texture would be the thruster portions of the main engines. I'm super happy with how these turned out in the end. I then rotate my repeatable texture pattern so that it looks proper when viewed from above, and I apply it to the bridge opening that I said I would revisit earlier. I eventually swap out the smooth quartz that the white parts of the ship are made out of for mushroom blocks, as they more accurately match the ship's color. But other than that, the entire outside of the ship is textured and finished. Now, to finish that opening at the front of the ship. I have a higher render distance now, so you can see everything properly. Babe, wake up! There's more metal beams to build. After all of the beams are in place and textured, I needed to create another repeatable pattern. Between all of the beams is this kind of metal framework that can be seen through but serves to enclose the space. Rotating an already rotated build isn't the easiest thing to do, but I eventually came up with all of the different rotated elements that I would need to make these framework sections. They curve to the hull of the ship, on top of the whole build already being at an angle. So times were tough when trying to figure out the logistics on this one, but I got there in the end. I ended up modeling the surface of these pieces of framework using glass as my temporary block, painting them individually, then applying them back into the build. I paused the replay recording during the process of painting these sections because of how long they took to line up properly. But here you can see them being put into place. It's not without flaws, but I'm happy with how this part turned out. I couldn't apply my pattern to all of the framework, so I textured these sections by hand. The final stretch of this build had begun. I began modeling the mess of platforms and walls that the giant opening into the ship exposes. I used slabs for the first time in this build, on the sections where the player will be able to stand, to make traversing the sloped surfaces easier. And I build more metal beams. Always more metal beams. For now, I'm leaving the interior of the ship, and the smaller details surrounding the entrances to be worked on at a later date. I know that a lot of people were hoping to see this part, but really I want to be done with the Aurora for the time being. Because the interior has to be angled like the rest of the build, I also want to take my time to ensure its quality meets standards, as it's going to be difficult to get right. More than anything else though, I wanted to get this video out. I've been working behind the scenes for years now, and getting the Aurora to this finished state and shown to you is a massive weight off of me. So for now, the Aurora is finished, and this is the final result. The replay recordings amassed total 640 hours. This isn't an accurate count of the amount of work hours this project actually took though, since time tabbed out and time where I'm not recording or time where I've paused recording don't count towards this number. A more accurate accrual would be the amount of Subnautica hours I've accumulated on Steam, totaling 1,300 from this project. I know that it's more than that, so I'm going to say 1,500 hours of work total is a good estimate, even though I know I've spent way more total time than that just figuring this build out. Work began nearly 3.5 years ago, on August 16th, 2022, when I got Minecraft for Java. And the final building replay recording was recorded on January 22nd, 2026, meaning this build took just under 3.5 years to complete. The height of this build totals 575 blocks, making the Aurora by itself too big to fit inside of the default height limit of the game. The build's block count totals 4,206,268 blocks, though you could probably shave off a couple 100,000 blocks if you remove all of the blocks that can't be seen from the outside and don't serve to complete the final look of the build. I'm going to leave these blocks in place for now though, because 4 million is a nice number. And these blocks aren't hurting anyone besides CPUs. And CPU's feelings aren't important anyway. Now, render billions of blocks all at once again for me. That's what I thought. I'm ecstatic to be done with the Aurora, because next episode I get to show you the rest of Subnautica brought over into Minecraft, and I can't wait. With that, this is your reminder to subscribe so you don't miss it, And this is me thanking you very much for watching, and signing off.